I started my own business at 14, paid off my debts, and bought a house in cash. Then my parents sued me for taking the life my brother deserved, and tried to sabotage what I had built, but I fought back and made sure they regret it. That is the high-level summary. The reality, as always, was a grimy, slow burn descent into profound betrayal, beginning in a town that felt perpetually gray. Fairmont, Ohio, was the kind of place built around manufacturing plants that had been dying since before I was born. Everything was rust and old paint. Our house always smelled faintly of Dad's machine grease and simmering resentment. My name is Joseph, and growing up, I was simply the other one. My older brother, Adrian, was the sun around which my parents' universe spun. He was the varsity football prospect, the smooth talker, the golden child. The question, "Why can't you be more like Adrian?" was the constant, low, humming soundtrack to my childhood. When I brought home a bad grade, when I forgot to take out the trash, or when I was just sitting quietly at the dinner table, that comparison hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. While Adrian was out practicing drills, I was in the small, cluttered basement, surrounded by the guts of broken electronics. I was obsessed with figuring out how things worked. This didn't impress my dad, who would look at me hunched over an old radio with a mixture of disgust and disappointment, like my very existence was a personal failure. The basement was the only space I could breathe. That's where it all started, with Mr. Kowalski, our neighbor, hauling junk to the curb. I saw an old, bulky point-of-sale system sitting there, probably from the early 2000s, covered in dust. He laughed when I asked if I could have it, saying it was broken, and not worth the $300 the repair guy wanted. I dragged that heavy machine into our damp basement, and it became my focus for the next month. I taught myself proper soldering from YouTube, scoured online forums for manuals, and slowly, piece by piece, brought the relic back to life. My first client wasn't a client at all, it was Mr. Kowalski. When he saw the working system, he mentioned it to Rick, who owned the auto parts store on Main Street. Rick showed up at our door and offered me $50 just to look at his freezing PO system. I fixed it in 2 hours. It was a simple database corruption issue. He watched me the whole time and, in the end, handed me $75 instead of the agreed upon $50. "You explained it so I actually understood what was wrong," he said. "That's worth something." In a town as small as Fairmont, word traveled fast. Soon I had local shops, contractor suppliers, hardware stores, independent garages, all calling me. They could not afford the big corporate solutions, but they would happily pay a teenager a few $100s to keep their ancient equipment functional. By the time I was 15, I was bringing home $300 or $400 a week. That's when my parents, who had previously mocked my hobby, suddenly took an interest. My mom, without blinking, took half of my first big paycheck. She said I needed to contribute to the household and start paying my way. I was a kid. I was still a freshman in high school, but arguing was useless. I learned quickly to keep 2 sets of books. They could take their cut from the smaller amount I showed them. The rest went into a lockbox hidden behind the furnace in the basement. Meanwhile, Adrian was getting every allowance and every expense covered. My business was just a phase to my dad, but it kept growing. At 16, I was making more than my mother's part-time job. I hired my cousin, Felix Vance, to help with installations. Felix was the only family member who saw me as anything other than a disappointment. He was good with his hands and a natural with customers. The real trouble started the day I made the mistake of bringing home a $900 check from a plumbing supply company job. The next day, my dad sat me down. With a serious face, he explained that since I was earning real money, I needed to start paying $400 a month in rent for a bedroom in a house they already owned. In their minds, I owed them. It wasn't rent, it was a financial siphon. The pattern was set: the more I made, the more they took, funneling the money toward Adrian's needs. The true breaking point came right after my 17th birthday. 3 credit card statements showed up in the mail. They all bore my name and my social security number. All 3 were maxed out. $28,000 of debt. I threw the statements on the coffee table and cornered them in the living room. My mom didn't deny it. She just said Adrian needed a car for college and they needed to fix the roof. "Your business gave us good credit," she said, "so we used it." "You stole my identity," I told them. My dad barely looked up from the television. "Don't get dramatic. It's family money anyway. You've been living here free for years." I had been paying them $400 a month for a year. That night, Adrian walked past my room. He stopped in the doorway with that smug golden child smirk and said, "Thanks for the car, little bro." In that moment, I realized they didn't see me as their son. They saw me as a resource to be blood dry for Adrian's sake. I knew I had to get out, or that debt would become my entire life. Following Adrian's smug thank you for the car I didn't want, the clarity that night was cold and absolute. I didn't cry or shout. I just packed a duffel bag with a single change of clothes and the lockbox of money I had squirreled away behind the furnace. The betrayal wasn't a sudden injury. It was the final confirmation of a parasitic relationship I had to end. I called Felix the next morning. He was the one link to my old life who didn't feel like a trap. We met at a cheap diner on the edge of town, the one with burnt coffee and stale donuts. I didn't mince words. I dumped the 3 credit card statements on the greasy Formica table, showing him the $28,000 of debt. Felix, who usually had a joke for everything, just stared. His jaw hardened as he read the numbers. Holy crap, Joseph. This is straight-up identity theft. They are your parents, but that doesn't matter. This is illegal as anything. His reaction was the validation I needed. He put me in touch with Marlene, a lawyer friend of his mother's who occasionally took cases pro bono for people who genuinely needed help. Marlene looked over the statements and the bank records, showing the household contributions they had been extracting from me since I was 15. She was kind, but clinical, laying out 2 clear paths. Press criminal charges, which meant jail time for my parents, or pursue legal emancipation. Despite the theft, despite the years of emotional abuse, I couldn't bring myself to press criminal charges. They were still, biologically, my parents, and the thought of being responsible for their incarceration felt like a burden I couldn't carry. Emancipation, however, was the ultimate severing of control. It would legally separate me from them before I turned 18, stripping them of all rights over my finances and my future. Building the case took 3 long months. I pored over bank statements, documenting every $400 rent payment, every household contribution, tracking every dollar they had extracted versus what they had claimed to have invested in me. The hard evidence was the unauthorized credit card debt. Marlene advised me to start recording conversations. It was agonizing, forcing myself to listen as my parents casually discussed using my earnings or planned new purchases with the credit line they had stolen. The decision solidified 2 months in. I walked into the living room and found my mom filling out an online application for a 4th credit card, using my social security number. She didn't flinch when I walked in. She simply closed the laptop and told me, "Mind your own business." It wasn't desperation, it was ingrained entitlement. The day they were served the legal papers for emancipation, the house exploded into a war zone. My dad's face went crimson, yelling about betrayal and how they had sacrificed everything for me. My mom cried, putting on a highly convincing performance of the devastated parent. Adrian, of course, was shaking his head at me, the perpetrator. "How could you do this to us?" My mother pleaded, tears streaming down her face. I looked at them, and I felt nothing but a dull ache of exhaustion. "I am not doing anything to you," I said, my voice flat. "I am protecting myself." For the 3 weeks leading up to the hearing, I moved in with Bruce D'Angelo, the older brother of my old shop teacher. Bruce was a retired electrician who lived alone. I slept on his worn couch, set up a temporary workstation in his large, dusty garage, and continued to run my business, filtering out the constant, demanding calls from my parents. They tried everything, calling my clients, showing up at Bruce's house to spread lies about me stealing from them, even getting the family priest involved to talk to me about honoring your mother and father. Their attempts only proved Marlene's point. They only wanted control, not reconciliation. The courthouse hearing was rough. My mom played her part perfectly, crying about her troubled son who was always difficult, and claiming they had only managed my finances to help a kid who didn't understand money. The judge, a woman named Judge Thompson, reviewed all the documents, the unauthorized credit cards, the recordings, and the bank statements. When she delivered the verdict, she spoke directly to my parents, her voice low and stern. She stated that the court saw a clear pattern of financial exploitation that made continued cohabitation impossible. She granted the petition for emancipation. At 17, I was legally an adult. I was free, but I was also alone with $28,000 of debt strapped to my back. Bruce helped me find a place, a converted garage apartment, behind an old warehouse on the industrial side of town. It was small, cold, and perfect. I filed paperwork establishing Valentini Systems as a real business entity, opened bank accounts my parents couldn't touch, and started to live my new, separate life. The reality of the debt hit hard. After rent and necessary business expenses, every spare dollar went to minimum payments. I created a spreadsheet tracking the payoff. Initial projection: 6 long years. 6 years of my life, every hour of work, dedicated to paying for the choices of the people who were supposed to protect me. I felt the immense weight of that sentence. But under that weight was a hard kernel of resolve. I had survived the betrayal. Now I just had to survive the consequences. 6 years of grinding work and saving went into every debt payment, transforming Joseph from a frightened kid into a disciplined, self-made man focused on building Valentini Systems. That debt was my shadow, my perpetual taskmaster. I lived cheap. I ate canned chili and gas station coffee for lunch. Every single extra dollar, the profit from a late-night server install, the fee for a database rebuild, it all went to chipping away at that $28,000 balance. My family cut contact completely. Adrian blocked my number, and my parents refused to acknowledge my existence. That first Thanksgiving, I ate fried chicken from a gas station deli in my cold garage apartment, working on a POS system for a hardware store in a town 2 hours away. I was lonely, but I was free. During this time, I started relying heavily on Felix. I hired him to help with installations, splitting jobs 70-30. He was good with people, a skill I definitely lacked, and he was reliable. He was the one person who kept showing up. He'd bring cheap beer and greasy pizza on a Friday night, talk about his job at his dad's auto shop, and listen while I vented my frustrations about a tricky firewall or a demanding client. He never pressured me to reconcile with my parents, he just kept being a friend. My neighbor, Mrs. Peppers, also became an unexpected anchor. She was one of those classic, nosy neighborhood women, but her nosiness was always accompanied by a plate of home-cooked food. She somehow found out where I was living and would stop by my shop space on the industrial side of town, claiming she was just in the area. She never asked questions about the emancipation, but she'd quietly hand me my mail that still got delivered to the old address and always had a kind word. The business kept evolving. I realized quickly that my clients, the blue-collar stores, the equipment rental places, didn't need a cheap fix. They needed systems that were genuinely rugged and reliable. They needed solutions built for their specific workflows, not corporate packages that cost thousands. I pivoted completely, specializing in customized, bulletproof posts and inventory systems. The biggest break came about 8 months after emancipation. The owner of a medium-sized auto parts chain with 5 locations approached me. Their systems were a mess, all running different setups and unable to communicate. He needed unified inventory tracking. This was huge, a serious enterprise-level project, but I didn't hesitate. I quoted him a price and a deadline. I spent the next 3 weeks doing nothing but research, learning network systems and centralized database architecture. Felix and I worked nights and weekends. When that system went live across all 5 locations and ran perfectly, it wasn't just a professional victory, it was a personal affirmation. The confidence was real. I wasn't just patching up old equipment anymore, I was building legitimate, complex solutions. By the time I was 18, I was hiring. 2 guys from the community college, Mason and Chris, joined the team. Mason, who had worked retail, helped immensely by pointing out real-world pain points, suggesting features like quick keys and sensible shift reports. I moved the operation out of the garage apartment and into a proper shop space. The business grew steadily. I started getting recognition in the county business journals. I even turned down an acquisition offer from a corporate rep when I was 19. The money was tempting, enough to pay off the debt and more, but I said no. This wasn't just a business. It was the physical proof that everyone who had written me off was wrong. It was my validation. The debt remained my focus, though. Every month, those payments ate up a massive chunk of profit. I updated my spreadsheet weekly, tracking the slow, agonizing decrease. I lived cheap, worked hard, and saved every possible penny. Finally, about a month after my 23rd birthday, I stared at the confirmation screen. Account paid in full. 6 years of grinding, living frugally, directing every last cent to that burden. The number hit 0. I sat in my small apartment, staring at the screen, and I felt this weird emptiness, a profound stillness. For so long, that debt had been my singular driving purpose. Finishing it left me without that constant, gnawing stress. Felix came by that night with takeout and asked, "So what now?" I looked at him, feeling the first flicker of genuine relief I had known in years. "Now," I told him, "figure out what I actually want, instead of just surviving." With the debt cleared, I made my first real investment. I bought a duplex that needed work, spent 6 months fixing it up, and rented both units out. It provided steady passive income. I started taking woodworking classes, a non-digital hobby that helped clear my head. That's how I was building my life, focused on security, stability, and tangible, earned success. I was content. That's the word. Not ecstatic, but simply relieved. I had built a fortress around myself, and for the first time in my life I felt truly safe. Just as Joseph started building a life beyond mere survival, the past reached out again, not with affection, but with a calculated, cold intent. For 6 years after emancipation, my contact with my former family was 0, except for the occasional, dreaded updates from Felix. He would fill me in on the ongoing disasters at home. Adrian had been kicked out of college for cheating. My parents were fighting constantly about money. Their house was falling apart. I listened, but kept my distance. Their chaos was no longer my responsibility. Then, the invitation arrived. It was a plain, printed card in a crisp white envelope. "You're invited to celebrate Leonard Van Lentini's retirement." My father was retiring from the plant, and apparently, they wanted me there to celebrate. I stared at the card for a long time. It was the first direct communication in 6 years. Felix called that same day. "You get the invitation?" "Yeah. Mom's been asking if I thought you'd show up. Seems important to them." Something felt profoundly wrong. After years of deliberate silence, this sudden interest in my presence was suspicious. Against every instinct screaming at me to avoid the trap, I felt compelled to go. I needed to understand their motivation. I RSVP'd yes. The retirement party was held at the local Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall. It was the standard cheap retirement affair: bad coffee, sad-looking grocery store sheet cake, and a slideshow nobody was really watching. Walking in was surreal. Conversations paused. Everyone was staring at me. My parents approached immediately. My dad had aged hard. His shoulders were permanently slumped, and he looked smaller. My mom had that carefully put-together look, but her eyes held a pinched, expectant expression. "Joseph, glad you could make it," Dad said, formal and distant. Adrian hung back, then came over with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Little bro, long time. Heard your little business is doing okay." "It pays the bills," I replied, keeping my own expression neutral. They introduced me to Dad's co-workers as or other son who works with computers. It felt less like a celebration and more like a stage display. I kept my distance, circulating and observing. The party felt more expensive than it should have been. Near the food table, I overheard my uncle talking to a former co-worker. "Now that Joseph's back in the picture, Leonard's hoping for some help. Kid's done well for himself. About time he stepped up for family." Later, I caught fragments of conversations about a big RV my dad supposedly bought, a cruise my mom had booked, and Adrian casually dropping that he had just put a down payment on a condo in the city. None of it made financial sense for a man retiring from a dying factory. Mrs. Peppers was there too. She settled up to me, plate in hand. "Interesting party, isn't it?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Lot of expensive choices for someone retiring from a factory." "I noticed that too," I admitted. "Your parents," she continued, "have been telling everyone you are doing very well indeed." The emphasis in her tone was clear. She was warning me. The drive back to my apartment that night was tense. The sudden invitation, the expensive party, the casual mentions of my success to their entire social circle. It all felt wrong. Then, 4 weeks later, while my dad was supposedly enjoying his new retirement, a courier delivered a stack of papers to my shop. Legal complaint. Leonard Valentini, Marlene Valentini, and Adrian Valentini as plaintiffs, me as defendant. They were suing me. The document was staggering in its audacity. They demanded us 35% ownership of Valentini Systems, plus $150,000 in damages for emotional distress and lost opportunities. Adrian's affidavit claimed I had stolen business opportunities that should have been his, and that our parents had invested in me while he received nothing. The entire filing was a fabrication, a narrative of self-pity and entitlement. Reading through the pages of lies, the retirement party suddenly made chilling, perfect sense. It was a setup, designed to gather information and create a public narrative of family reunion before they launched their attack. I called my business attorney, Julian, immediately and forwarded everything. Julian's response was precise. "This is creative fiction, Joseph. They're claiming they provided critical early support for your business development." "They stole from me, Julian," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't felt since I was 17. "They opened credit cards in my name and stuck me with the debt. I started my own business at 14, paid off my debts, and bought a house in cash. Then my parents sued me for taking the life my brother deserved and tried to sabotage what I had built. I need you to know I am fighting back, and I am going to make sure they regret this." The core dialogue, the summary of my entire existence, poured out in a moment of absolute fury. It was the declaration of war I had avoided for years. "We have the emancipation case documents," Julian assured me. "Their claims are garbage, but they are not after a legal victory. They want a settlement. They are banking on you paying them off to avoid the hassle and potential damage to your business reputation." That realization intensified my anger. They were trying to monetize the only thing I had ever built for myself. I told my legal team, which now included Marlene, to fight this all the way. Spare no expense. As the legal process started, we discovered how calculated they had been. Through discovery, we learned Adrian had created fake LinkedIn profiles to monitor my business, gathering information about clients and revenue. They had been pumping Felix for details about my work whenever he visited them. Most disturbing was the evidence of attempted access to my business bank accounts using security question answers. Questions about my childhood that only family would know. Our IT guy traced the attempts to an IP address matching my parents' internet provider. Felix felt awful when he realized his casual conversations had been exploited. "I didn't know," he apologized. "I thought they actually cared when they asked how you were doing." "It's not your fault, Felix," I told him, though the knot of distrust in my stomach tightened. "They're just good at playing people." The emotional hit was worse than the emancipation. I had spent 6 years building a life completely separate from them. I was successful, debt-free, and legally free. Now, they were trying to claw their way back in, not because they wanted me, but because they saw money they thought they deserved. The fortress I had built felt suddenly fragile. I realized I didn't just need a legal defense. I needed to rebuild my entire infrastructure of trust. This second battle was not about freedom. It was about survival. I started dating around this time, meeting Karina Rise at my woodworking class. She was an engineer, analytical and independent, with her own successful career. Our connection was easy, based on mutual respect for work and competence. But I kept my emotional guard high. I couldn't shake the ingrained belief that every relationship, even this promising one, carried a conditional clause, a hidden expectation of return. The lawsuit was a constant, dark reminder of the price of vulnerability. The process forced me to rely on others, my legal team, and eventually, the unwavering loyalty of Felix. The fight for my business was in fact a fight to learn who, if anyone, I could truly trust. With the court date looming, the legal battle became a desperate race to expose the true motives behind the calculated greed of the people Joseph once called family. My legal team, led by Julian and Marlene, spent 8 months in a grueling discovery process. My parents and Adrian had tried to present themselves as humble, loving benefactors who were simply seeking fair compensation. But the discovery process stripped away that facade, revealing something much uglier: coordination, malice, and blatant manipulation. We uncovered emails between my parents and Adrian going back almost 2 years, plotting exactly how to reconnect with me and pursue financial claims. My mom had been meticulously saving articles about my business and taking screenshots of social media posts, building a file of my success that she intended to weaponize. Adrian, with his corporate sales background, had created a detailed spreadsheet estimating Valentini Systems' worth based on client numbers and industry averages. This wasn't a sudden desperate grab, it was a long-term, calculated strategy of resentment. The most damning evidence came during the depositions. My parents were required to testify under oath about the crucial early support they claimed to have provided to Valentini Systems. When Dad was asked about the extent of his mentorship, he claimed letting me use the basement and electricity were significant contributions. Under cross-examination by Marlene, he had to reluctantly admit that beyond telling me to work harder, he had offered zero business guidance. When Marlene introduced the documents from my emancipation case, detailing the $28,000 in fraudulent credit card debt, their entire narrative of support collapsed. Mom's testimony focused entirely on emotional investment and sacrifice. When Marlene countered with the bank statements showing the rent and household contributions they had taken from me since I was 15, and pressed her on the unauthorized credit card debt, Mom broke down. The performance wasn't convincing, it was desperate. She was asked about their recent purchases, the RV, the cruise, Adrian's condo down payment, and Dad reluctantly admitted they had taken out a loan based on anticipated settlement proceeds. They had gambled their future on stealing mine. Adrian's deposition was almost farcical. When Julian pressed him on his claim that I had stolen business opportunities that should have been his, Adrian, under oath, couldn't articulate what those opportunities were. He was a salesman with a silver tongue, but he couldn't back up his entitlement with facts. He claimed that, because he was the older son, he was naturally entitled to the family's best opportunities, even though he had never shown any aptitude or interest in my industry. He was left with nothing but his naked jealousy. The case went before Judge Thompson, the same judge who handled my emancipation. During the final proceedings, my parents' testimony became frantic, desperate attempts to win sympathy. But Judge Thompson was focused solely on the documented evidence. After 8 grueling months of legal maneuvering, Judge Thompson issued her ruling. She dismissed the case entirely with a harsh opinion that called my family's claims as demonstrably false and potentially fraudulent. She stated that the financial exploitation that led to my emancipation precluded any argument of early support. The climax of their calculated attack ended not just in failure, but in public humiliation. The judge ordered them to pay my legal fees and court costs. Julian estimated the total would be significant, likely forcing them to sell their house to satisfy the judgment. Outside the courthouse, in the brief moment before the security detail could intervene, Adrian tried to approach me. He looked pale and defeated. "This is ridiculous, Joseph," he hissed, his voice low with residual anger. "We're family. You're really going to let them lose their house over this?" I looked him straight in the eye. I didn't raise my voice. "Family doesn't commit identity theft. I'm not doing anything. Adrian, they did this to themselves." My dad was standing nearby, his shoulders even more slumped than at the party. "We raised you. Gave you everything," he mumbled, his voice cracking. I looked at him one last time, making sure he understood the finality of my words. "No," I said, cold and quiet. "You took everything." Walking away from that courthouse, I felt a peculiar sensation. Not triumph, but a profound final emptiness. The immense weight of the fight was gone, replaced by the chilling reality that the people who were supposed to be my foundation had spent 2 decades trying to destroy me, and their efforts had finally self-destructed. The ties were not just severed, they were burned to ash. My independence was now absolute, protected by a court ruling. The next battle, I knew, would be an internal one, learning to live without a need for armor. I was legally vindicated, but emotionally drained. The road to genuine trust and contentment felt longer than ever. The court may have dismissed the case, but the enemy was not yet defeated. Adrian, fueled by malice, launched a desperate final attack on Joseph's livelihood. The legal victory felt like a massive shield, but shields only protect against one type of weapon. I was still dealing with the lingering anger from the lawsuit when Felix called one Tuesday morning, his voice tight. "You need to hear this," he said. "Adrian's working for Computra Solutions now. Computra was my biggest competitor, a corporate outfit that charged twice what I did and oversold features nobody needed. I sat down, the blood draining from my face. "So?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "So he's been calling your clients, Joseph, offering them migration packages to switch to Computra. He's using information he got from the lawsuit discovery. Client lists, project details, all of it. The client list. It was the heart of Valentini Systems. That information had been shared during discovery, and while it was supposed to be sealed by the court, Adrian, in his malicious cunning, had obviously retained copies before the sealing order went into effect. I called Julian, my attorney, immediately. He confirmed that while it was ethically repugnant and a clear misuse of pre-sealed information, Adrian hadn't technically violated any laws that could be prosecuted quickly. We could send cease and desist letters, but Adrian would simply claim it was normal sales outreach. This was different from the lawsuit. The lawsuit was about seizing control. This was about actively trying to destroy the foundation of my life, using my own hard work against me. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 established clients called me, asking pointed questions about Computra's offers. Adrian wasn't just cold calling, he was spreading highly specific lies, telling them Valentini Systems was financially unstable and looking to sell. He advised them they should switch now, before things went under. I couldn't afford a whisper of instability after the public nature of the lawsuit. Losing those 3 clients would be a massive blow, but the resulting word of mouth would be catastrophic. The business community runs on reputation. I went on the offensive immediately, canceling all non-essential work. I reached out to every client personally. I brought Felix with me to every installation and check-in, making sure they saw the boots. On the ground support they valued. We spent 2 weeks traveling the state, visiting every shop, hardware supplier, and auto parts store. We didn't mention Adrian directly. Instead, we demonstrated new features we were developing and offered extended, no-cost warranties. Most clients appreciated the direct contact. Several mentioned that Adrian's calls felt desperate, which made them suspicious. He was selling corporate solutions, but he was doing it with a desperate edge that didn't fit the product. But Adrian wasn't done. When he realized the soft sell wasn't working, he escalated, spreading baseless rumors that Valentini Systems was under investigation for fraud by state licensing boards. Completely fabricated, but the implication was damaging. Mrs. Peppers, my perennial informant, heard about it from someone at her church and called me immediately to warn me. "Joseph dear, this is bad," she said. "They are saying you're cutting corners on electrical installs." I thanked her and hung up, feeling the familiar cold rage in my stomach. They never gave up, but this final desperate act backfired spectacularly. One of my oldest and most loyal clients, Rick from the auto parts chain, the man who gave me my first paid job, called after hearing the fraud rumors. I checked with the Better Business Bureau and the state licensing board. "Joseph," Rick said, "nothing on file about you at all." I explained the whole family situation, the lawsuit, the complete history of Adrian's sabotage. Rick listened in silence. "Your own brother is trying to tank your business," he finally said. "That's really low. I'm going to make some calls." Rick's intervention, combined with my own face-to-face visits, was the pivot point. The blue-collar business community, which valued integrity and reliability above all else, rallied. They had seen how I built my business from nothing, paying my debts. They had seen the corporate types come and go. When they heard Adrian's story, a privileged kid trying to destroy his younger brother's honest, successful company, it made them furious. Within a week, the word had spread like wildfire. Shop owners called me specifically to say they had shut Adrian down immediately. Computra's reputation took a hit just for employing him, a fact I was certain Julian's team would be making very public. Adrian's gambit failed. Worse than failed, it strengthened my position. Clients who had been casual about my services became fiercely loyal. New clients approached me specifically because they had heard how I had handled the slander, demonstrating stability under fire. Computra fired Adrian 6 weeks later. I didn't celebrate, but I felt a profound sense of vindication. My reputation wasn't built on what my family claimed about me. It was built on my actions, my systems, and the trust I had earned over a decade. The external threat had been defeated not by legal force, but by the quiet power of integrity. I realized then that my fortress was not the walls I built around my heart, but the network of trustworthy people I had cultivated, chief among them Felix. The final external attack had reinforced the lesson the lawsuit had begun. I couldn't be hyper-independent, but I could be discerning about who I allowed close. The fight had required me to trust my team, and their loyalty had saved everything. The sabotage attempt solidified Valentini Systems' position, leading directly to the opportunity that would permanently cement Joseph's success and allow him to truly begin living. The day Adrian was fired from Computra, I didn't feel triumph, just quiet relief. His failure was not my win was the stability he couldn't touch. That stability paid off almost immediately. 3 months after the Computra incident, the regional manager for one of the largest equipment rental companies in the Midwest called me. They had 43 locations, and their antiquated system was causing inventory chaos. "We heard about the recent drama," the manager, a straight-talking guy named Mark, said during our initial meeting. The whole business community talked about it. That situation showed us you've got integrity, Joseph. You protected your clients under fire. We are interested in a 3-year contract for all 43 locations. This was the biggest opportunity I had ever faced, revenue that would effectively double my business size within a year. It wasn't just money, it was confirmation that my reputation was now national, built on reliability, not family. We negotiated for 2 weeks. I signed the final contract on a Friday afternoon. I sat in my office afterwards looking at the papers, trying to process what had just happened. I had survived betrayal, paid off $28,000 of fraudulent debt, won a malicious lawsuit, and defeated a corporate saboteur. Now I was a key vendor for a regional chain. With the business finally secure, I started focusing on my personal life. I needed somewhere that truly felt like a home, not just another rented space or a temporary fortress. I started seriously looking at property, wanting somewhere permanent. I found a small house on 2 acres outside of town. It was built in the 1960s, nothing fancy, but it had good bones and a huge detached garage. I had saved enough to buy it outright. No mortgage, no bank dependence, just a simple transaction. Walking into the title company and writing a check for the full amount felt like the most profound statement of independence I could ever make. It wasn't just a house. It was tangible proof that the kid who had been forced to pay rent on his own bedroom in a house he didn't own now owned his own ground. I spent the next 8 months fixing it up. Felix helped with the heavy work, hanging drywall, running new electrical lines. Working on the house was therapeutic. The wood was real, the concrete was solid, and the work was honest. It was a physical manifestation of the business I had built, stable, practical, and entirely mine. My relationship with Karina also grew during this time. She was patient, smart, and utterly non-dependent on me, which was crucial. She had her own career and her own financial stability. She saw my success not as a resource but as a discipline, and she understood my need for security. We spent weekends side by side, me in the garage working on the house, her working on engineering projects. She didn't try to tear down my walls, she just built her own stable foundation beside them. The moment of absolute clarity, the emotional arc's culmination, happened one evening in the kitchen of the newly finished house. We were standing there, Felix, Karina, and I, having just finished installing the last of the cabinets. "This is really happening," Felix said, looking around. "A long way from that basement. Couldn't have done it without you, Felix," I admitted. I didn't just mean the labor, I meant the loyalty. He had faced my parents' scrutiny and manipulation and never wavered. I sat them both down the following week. I looked at Felix and told him I was making him a full partner. 20% ownership of Valentini Systems. He deserved a real stake, not just a contractor fee. His eyes widened, but he accepted with quiet dignity. We signed the papers at a coffee shop, just the two of us. It was the deepest level of professional trust I had ever extended, proving that I could, finally, share my fortress. Then, I looked at Karina. She was the one person who had been there through the lawsuit, who saw the deepest, ugliest parts of my past, and who still chose to stay unconditionally. She taught me that not all relationships were transactional, and that vulnerability didn't have to mean exploitation. I proposed to her on the back porch of our new house, looking out over the 2 acres of land I owned. It wasn't a grand, cinematic moment, it was quiet and certain. "This house, the business, all of it," I told her, "it's solid. But you're the first thing in my life that actually feels like a home, not just a safe place to sleep." She said yes, and the weight of the past finally, fully, lifted. The engagement was the final symbol of my emotional independence. I had spent so long building a life based on avoiding betrayal. Now, I was building a life based on genuine commitment. I had achieved ultimate professional success, and now I had earned personal peace. I was ready to live in the life I had built. The chaos was over. The structure Joseph built, financial, emotional, and professional, was finally, truly his own. The years that followed the lawsuit and Adrian's failed sabotage were defined by quiet growth and a welcome absence of stress. The 3-year contract with the equipment rental company became the catalyst for massive expansion. Within 6 months, we hired more people, leased a larger shop space, and I made the decision to buy the building outright, instead of renting. It was a major financial commitment, but owning the ground beneath my business felt right, a final shield against the instability of the past. By my 29th birthday, Felix and I had over 200 active clients across 5 states. Valentini Systems, the company started in a dusty basement, was now worth well over $500,000, with steady, manageable growth projections. Karina and I set a wedding date. She moved into the house, bringing her own tools and her own projects, making the garage feel less like a lone wolf's den and more like a shared creative space. Mrs. Peppers, of course, was delighted, bringing us wedding magazines and advice, treating Karina like a daughter. Felix, now my partner, continued to be my grounding wire. He'd occasionally fill me in on the ongoing disintegration of my former family. Adrian was working retail, living with my parents in the cramped apartment they'd moved into after their house was sold to pay my legal fees. My dad's health issues made work impossible, And my mom was exhausted, working multiple jobs just to keep them afloat. Their disaster was complete, a slow-motion consequence of their own choices. I listened, but I felt no vindication, only the cold comfort of my distance. Their problems were not mine to solve. The boy who felt responsible for their happiness was long gone. Dad tried to reach out one last time through Mrs. Peppers. She came by my shop one afternoon with a container of cookies, her face troubled. "Joseph?" She started twisting her apron in her hands. "Your father, Leonard. He called me. He wants to talk. He begged me to convince you to give them a chance. To reconcile." I stopped soldering, setting the iron down carefully. I looked at Mrs. Peppers, this kind, meddling woman who had protected me from their toxicity for years. "Tell him thank you for the message," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "And tell him I am not interested. Some bridges once burned should stay ash." Mrs. Peppers looked sad, but she nodded. She understood. My decision was not about hatred, it was about self-preservation. Allowing them back in would invite chaos. By the time I turned 30, I had everything I had painstakingly built toward. A successful business, a good relationship, a home I owned outright, and people around me who cared for me unconditionally. The emotional arc was complete. I had started as an emotionally guarded kid, believing that worth was earned through constant toil, and that love was always conditional. The betrayal had forced me to build a professional fortress, but the crisis of the lawsuit had forced me to find the courage to trust. Standing on the back porch of my own house with Karina one evening, watching the sun set over the 2 acres of land, I realized the ultimate lesson: the best revenge wasn't in watching them fail, but in building a life so completely whole, so independent, and so joyful that their bitterness could no longer touch me. I was content and finally, truly free.